For the Pittsburgh Steelers, everyone knows with their new quarterback situation that there could be some rocky roads ahead. But I want to talk to someone who's covered the team when they've been searching for a franchise quarterback before in the 90s. And so we bring in longtime expert Jim Wexell. I want to get his perspective on covering it then and his outlook on covering it now, as well as more of Jim's draft insights. All that here more and the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. Thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. More on them later. As I said before, we're joined by longtime Steelers writer, esteemed author, Jim Wexel. You can read his work at the Steel City Insider 24/7 Sports, covering the Steelers there. But you can also get his Polamalu book, his draft book. He's done a lot of great work there. Jim, thank you so much for making time to come back on the show.
Chris, it's always great to be with one of you young guns, especially a young gun that can talk as fast as you, man.
They don't call me the twister of podcasts for nothing, because I can get it going. But Jim, I wanted to talk to you today specifically, and we'll get to the draft because the draft is a week away and everything. But I wanted to talk to you because over the weekend I came across a clip that someone posted on Twitter, and it was an ESPN news clip of when back in the 90s, I think it was the 95 season, and Bill Cowher had just benched Jim Miller, who had been made the starting quarterback out of training camp, but he benched him midweek one and then goes to Mike Tomczak. Kordell Stewart's on the roster, and you see guys like Jerome Bettis just being like, it is what it is. We got to, adjust. We believe in Mike, and it's just like it was just a lot of chaos. And people think back to that time, and it's like, man, that looked rough. And you see guys like Joe Theismann and Ron Jaworski breaking it down and saying, like, you're not saying that you have too much confidence in guys. If you don't have confidence in Miller, who you just benched, you didn't have confidence in Tomczak to make him the starter. What kind of message are you sending? And Jim, I want you to kind of, because most Steelers fans, I think of my generation, they might not remember what that is. I kind of remember it. I was a little kid when that stuff was going on, but they might not be able to appreciate what it was like to cover that. Do you just remember the daily chaos of not knowing who was going to be the quarterback every week?
I came in 95, so this is my 30th year, and they had drafted Kordell Stewart in the second round and began using him as a slash the next year. So there was hope for 4 or 5 years that they had a quarterback of the future, just needed more polish. Now, I remember 96. Jim Miller was the starting quarterback for, I believe, 1 quarter.
Yes.
Yeah, he was the guy coming out of camp. And the next year they went to the AFC Championship game. And it's not that like Kordell Stewart tore it up either. He was solid, but they could do it with power and defense, right?
Right.
Even though that 97 team, I tell you, they had lost a lot of free agents up to that point. And then there were injuries in 97. I don't think Bill Cowher gets enough credit for getting that team to the AFC Championship game. I know Jerome Bettis in his prime had a lot to do with it, but still. And Kordell Stewart. And, in 2000, there was chaos. All of a sudden, Bill Cowher, while he was driving to work, decided to make Kent Graham the starter to start the season in 2000. And that was a disaster, and Kordell came in and did okay. And then in 2001, they went to the AFC Championship game with power and defense and Kordell Stewart. Now, it was a different era then. You could do it. And I think right now, if you don't have a quarterback, you have no alternative. But you can't just keep reaching for quarterbacks and ignore linemen that are there that could help you power and play defense. But you have to admit that the rules now do favor the speed outside, the passing game, the quarterback, all that has to be used. And so with your power and defense, but I see no alternative sometimes. Sometimes you have to stop reaching for the quarterback. You get a couple lucky ones that fall in your lap like this year and see what that brings. It's a better chance than the alternative of Kenny. I still had some hope for Kenny, but Kenny and Mason Mason proved he's a quality NFL backup. So that was unexciting. I was looking, for more chaos. I see they bring in a whole new quarterback room, and there's less chaos, in my opinion.
That's the crazy part, right? Like, I think it's also different compared to then, where like Tomczak, Miller, Stewart was the hope, right? Like you had it, but Miller and Tomczak they didn't inspire much. Russell Wilson has at least been in a Pro Bowl quarterback 9 times. He's won a Super Bowl championship. He's been a guy that's shown, hey, I could do it at this level. Heck, he threw 26 touchdowns last year. You throw 26 touchdowns for the last year's Steelers, they have a good shot to win the division. Like that's how good that they could have been with a quarterback who was able to make a functional offense go. Granted, there were other problems around the Steelers. Not saying that just would have fixed everything overnight, but that would have really helped the Steelers. And if he can do that, that's great. And then Justin Fields, another first-round pick. It's funny, but I kind of compare him to Kordell Stewart. He's athletic. Yeah, sure, he has things to clean up, but there's hope that, hey, maybe he could end up being the guy if you develop him the right way. And that's where I think that you've got the hope and you've got the a more experienced veteran than those times. And I think that there could be chaos. There could be, Justin Fields, Russell Wilson wins the starting job and then Justin Fields takes over like Kenny Pickett took over from Mitch Trubisky. But I have reason to think, and I think it's legitimate reason to think, that this group, it could be chaos, but it won't be the same kind of chaos where there's like back then there was just so many questions as far as would they ever figure out the quarterback situation, whereas this year you have 2 really decent shots at figuring it out, at least to the point that this team needs a quarterback.
If Justin Fields takes over, that could be a good thing. Mm-hmm. Considering the polish he needs and his potential, his ceiling, and he's more likely to sign with the team. My guess is they're going to leave both unsigned through the year, not extend before the year starts, and have confidence that next March they'll be able to deal with them. Justin Fields isn't going to want to go to his 3rd team in 3 years.
No.
If he sees hope here, I assume he'll get along with Tomlin. There'll be ups and downs like coaches and students, but you know Mike Tomlin's energy, mm-hmm. His compassion for people, his ability to make you work when maybe you don't want to. He brings you that energy. He's an energy giver. So I actually think both are going to like playing here so much they're going to want to continue. And maybe how much money does Russell Wilson need? Maybe he wants a ring more than he wants more add to his $300 million he's already made in the NFL.
That's what I want to get to you in the next segment about is the chance to even compete for a ring with either of these guys at quarterback, because it also ties back to some of the things that were being said about that quarterback room back in the mid-90s. We'll do that here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, Jim Wexel, still a lot to talk about. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by BetterHelp. What's the first thing that you do if you had an extra hour in your day? Maybe you'd go for a run, maybe you'd read a book, or maybe you'd just be there for a friend. But what about being there for yourself? That's where therapy can help you figure out what matters the most to you so that you can do more of it while giving yourself to whatever else you want to devote your time to in your life. I personally benefited from the help of a good therapist in my life who's helped me sort out some of the most important things that I can try to balance every single day. But if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. BetterHelp knows life can be busy and stressful, so it's designed to be suitable for your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and then after that, you could switch therapists based on however you like at any time for no additional charges. That's what makes BetterHelp therapy so awesome. Learn to make time for what makes you happy by going with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month when you sign up. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Jim Wexel. Jim, back into the point that you were getting there about, competing for a ring. I agree. Russell Wilson said as much, like even when he was just still in free agency and it was just everyone's wondering what would he want to do. He said, I want to go somewhere where I can win 2 rings, but to end my career. I want to do that. If the Steelers can get to that point. I agree with you. Like he might stick. Like let's say he works out here. He throws another 26 touchdowns, maybe some less interceptions. The offense functions well. Maybe not top of the league or in the top 10, but maybe they are a decent functioning offense with a top 10 defense again. And then all of a sudden they're in the playoffs and not just the first team that gets kicked out in the first round, by the Buffalo Bills. Maybe they're in the divisional round. Maybe they get to the AFC Championship game. And then there's hope to say like, hey, there's something here to win forward with. And that's something that Russell Wilson will want to stick with. And I think that's something that Justin Fields can be like, hey, Russell be 36, 37, going into that next season. He could be saying like, look, I'm next up. And this is the offense that I get with that defense on the other side of the ball. I could stay here, keep learning and keep growing. And then when it's my time, I'll get a shot here. But how much of a reality do you think it is that in today's NFL, the Steelers can win with either of those guys leading the way at quarterback?
Well, again, 1996, Jim Miller's your starting quarterback. 1997, you're in the AFC Championship game. Mm-hmm. And they should have gone to the Super Bowl. They were sick. They were sick about losing that game. They had the lead. They could have put them away at halftime with Jerome Bettis was churning on 2nd and 2, but they decided a better call would be an interception. So, they out-clevered themselves. And then again in 2000, Kent Graham was your quarterback. And then the next year they were in the AFC Championship game. So this could happen. Sure. I mean, how much better Russell Wilson has to be than Kordell Stewart? Since, hey, you brought all this up to me, you started the show at 96. I'm using Kordell Stewart for a whole hour, it looks like. But, so it's very possible. And Russell Wilson has what it takes. And those defenders, there's some special defenders over there. They stay healthy. They fix the O-line in the draft. And, what is with the plan at wide receiver, Chris? I mean, maybe Deontay Johnson was a bigger pain in the butt behind closed doors than he was that we knew. I mean, we knew he got Trubisky pulled with one halftime explosion, and then he got the offensive coordinator fired with one sideline harangue. So Deontay, he did some spectacular work in that regard. But he just didn't seem like a troublemaker. You interviewed him, he was very mild-mannered when we talked to him. Yeah, right. So who knows how big of a pain in the butt he was, but I mean, he could play a bit. We all saw his flaws. But man, when they traded him, I assumed they had a plan. I don't see a plan.
And that's a big part of the question here, Jim, is what is the plan there? Because with the quarterback, you need targets to throw to, even in an offense that you want to make run first, make it about running the football, playing balanced. You still need receivers to spread the ball around to. And I go back to those years. Let's look at 97 and 2001 specifically. 97, you had Yancey Thigpen who could take it. He almost had 1,400 yards, which in 1997, that's ridiculous. Like he was playing at a very high level in that year. And then in 2001, you got Hines Ward, catching the ball, leading the way for your team. And that year he had over 1,000. You also had Plaxico Burress led the team with 5 more yards than Hines Ward. But you got a 1-2 punch there. Even Bobby Shaw was pretty decent on that team as a third option. But you go back and you compare it to right now, the Steelers really only have George Pickens as a proven guy. Van Jefferson, Quez Watkins, all those guys, even Calvin Austin, who I think you can be hopeful that he develops. You don't have something proven there. And I'm right with you. Them sending away Deontay Johnson puts them behind the 8 ball. They got to find an answer at wide receiver and maybe even 2 answers at wide receiver to make this offense function. It's why I would not rule out them drafting a receiver in the first round, despite their needs for offensive tackle and corner.
I just don't see the wide receiver aligning at pick 20.
Okay.
I think there's better alignment in the second round with Xavier Legette and
Ricky Pearsall
and kid from Texas, A.D. Mitchell.
Xavier, if Adonai Mitchell falls to 51, the Steelers should do backflips. That guy, to me, deserves to be a first round pick. I would anticipate him even being like the Bills' first round pick at 28. But you're absolutely right. I think that with a pick at 20. There's good, just with the way that quarterbacks look like they're going to fall, the way that, and there could be a run on them. they're either going to get a top flight tackle or a top flight corner at 20 available to them. And they're like, those are two primary positions of need and positions of value that matches up too well for them. And then you go to that second round. That's where it can get really tricky, Jim, because you and I, we've talked about centers and the importance of finding a guy that can be a good center. But if you have a shot at like a Zach Frazier versus let's dream big here and say Adonai Mitchell's sitting there. That is not an easy call in my mind. Adonai Mitchell would be a primary playmaker, but Zach Frazier or a starting center is such an important need in this year's draft class right now with the way the roster is made up.
Chris, that's why I'm so disappointed in this plan at wide receiver. Because here, okay, yeah, you're great at drafting them. You've drafted Lima Swede, James Washington, Chase Claypool. I mean, Marcus Wheaton. We forget about all the misses in the second round.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they've had some guys, but they only have one of them left.
Yeah.
So, okay, you're a great team at finding wide receivers, but do you have to draft one every year in the second round? Let's build that line. You know, a tackle, the tackles align. If Terrion Arnold falls, Quinion Mitchell, you know, one of those guys falls, that's possible to 20, but otherwise it's going to be a tackle that's going to align. A quality tackle will align at pick 20, probably better than any other position. And so that leaves you without a center. You got to get that center in the second round. And yes, there are good quality centers. So that's a good plan to go for the center in the second round, even if you have to get the Georgia kid. And I'm all for adding more Georgia offensive linemen. I'll tell you that. And so you got to wait. But if you have to waste it on a wide receiver again, and it looks like that's what's going to happen. I don't see any of these big trades being pulled off. And if they were to trade for one of these guys, like the T. Higgins and Brandon Ayuk,
Mm-hmm.
They're going to have to spend that second rounder at least.
Yeah. And so then you're paying big money.
Yeah.
Right. I'm right with you, Jim. I talked about that with Mike DeFabo on Monday's podcast, just thinking like, look, I get the allure of a Brandon Ayuk, of a proven route runner who can do that. But why would you why do you think they would trade away Deontay Johnson, not get great compensation for him, to then trade for Brandon Ayuk, probably have to give up whatever compensation you got or worse, and then have to pay him more money than you were paying Deontay? That would just seem like a very backwards way of doing things. And I mean, sure, the Steelers have done things that we've all disagreed with at times with their personnel decisions, but that does not add up to me. What adds up to me is them fortifying the lines makes a lot of sense, and then finding a young playmaker wide receiver in this draft class. Remember, they do have 2 third-round picks, and they have a 4th-round pick. They could make some moves to try to maybe get a second-round pick to get back up in there if they get their center at 51, or even move up higher to make sure they do get their center in the second round, and then still try to get their receiver later. I think that there's a higher likelihood, like you said, of the first 2 picks being either tackle or corner with a center with that second round pick. And then if they get a second round pick, that could be where they go get a wide receiver. But the thing is that they need one, and they've kind of pigeonholed themselves in a situation where they have all of these needs. I know that, you know, the Steelers, they may have confidence in Dan Moore Jr. to be the tackle, and start this year, but by and large, if you want this team to be able to run the ball, the way Mike Tomlin said at the owners' meetings, the way they've talked about, going how they want to play football and how they want the Steelers football to be defined with this Arthur Smith's offense, you need road graders on this offensive line. I think Broderick Jones qualifies for that. I think Sayamalu can help with that. I think Daniels can help with that. But they need another tackle and a center who I think can pair with Broderick Jones for the long term, so that they can have 3 studs. They're like, hey, this is the group that's going to be here for the next 8 to 10 years and keep things going. You saw the last group, Pouncey and DeCastro and Gilbert. Gilbert ended up, aging out or getting injured, and he kind of wasn't able to stick with the group. But that was the group that was kind of the anchor for the last offensive line. And you need to invest the picks to get those anchors for this group if you're going to fit the vision of that offense.
Okay. That's a lot to unpack, Chris. Man.
That's what we do here, man.
Well, our mutual friend Brian Batko, he had Duke Manyweather on the show, and Duke says that Dan Moore is looking great. He's built on his great work last year. He expects a nice year out of Dan. Okay, so and I assume they're going to start the season with Dan Moore, and I don't know that he's going to play poorly enough to give it up, and I don't know how the right rookie, let's just call him a right tackle. I'd love to see that Washington kid, Futanu.
Yeah.
That's a good left tackle. I like him better than Alt and Olu from Penn State. I really like that Washington. See, he's 6'3", 6'4", so he's not getting all the love. And so perfectly, he might fall to number 20. Now, there's a left tackle you can put behind Moore, and it makes sense. Right now, you draft a right tackle, you got to think about moving Broderick over. When do you move Broderick over? Well, Moore's the starter, and he's building on the offseason too. But they do need a number 3. So they could still convince themselves of drafting one in the first round because they need a number 3. Mm-hmm. And it could be a right tackle, but that would be for the future. I don't know how much help he would be this year.
And just to point a note here, Faltanu was a visit for the Steelers on Monday, and he posted, dreams do come true or dreams turn reality. He posted on his Instagram when he was getting a chance to look at the Steelers practice facility, posting from the Steelers practice facility. And this is a guy who, he talked about growing up. He had a Troy Polamalu jersey, he's a Samoan player rooting for other Samoan players. And, that's a guy who could be there at 20th overall. And you know what? I like Faltanu as well. I like Talisa Fuaga as well, the offensive tackle out of Oregon State. And I got this question for you, Jim, because I'm with you that Dan Moore, like if they get a guy who doesn't project as like a day one starter, Dan Moore is the starter and it's there. But like, to me, I think a Talisa Fuaga or a Faltanu or any of these, any of those top guys, maybe like not a Marius Mims, but like if they get JC Latham or any of those top 4 or 5 guys, I think that some of those guys, especially Fuaga, you plug him in at right tackle because Dan Moore Jr., I feel like they've tried to make him a right tackle for years. And for whatever reason, he just hasn't gotten it. And so they've had
to do it. He's terrible. He's terrible. So, Tomlin knows it. Tomlin even admitted it at a press conference. So they're not going to even try that. And that's the problem with making Dan Moore the number 3.
Yeah.
The problem is drafting a right tackle. You're going to put him in a spring ball the first day to get him ready. Like say it's Mims. And I know you sounded dismissive of him, but I don't call him injury plagued because I think that hamstring injury dealt off the ankle injury that these seniors, when they're coming out, whatever year he is in school, but when these draft prospects come out, they don't get to rest after the season. They got to start training and get their track stuff down. So I'm guessing his ankle never really healed, and that led to the hamstring. So I think it's interconnected, and he could use a rest. And so being number 3 for the Steelers would be perfect for him. Plus, he only has 8 starts, but he could be the Marcus Gilbert to Marquise Pouncey. When they drafted Pouncey, they had a stud, and they went to him. They says, "Who do you like? You got anybody down there?" And he said, "Marcus Gilbert. Get Gilbert here." And they got him here, and he had running buddies. And they started to build around Pounce, and what. That group had energy and chemistry, and Ramon Foster said the same thing. I had him on a podcast. He says Broderick Jones has got to meet Pouncey first and learn this. He's got to get one of his guys. This next draft pick has to be, if not one of his old guys, whoever they'll pick him. Broderick Jones puts his arm around him and says, "Listen, run with me, kid." And then Broderick Jones becomes your next great cornerstone of the line. Whether he's playing right side or left side. And if you said he had the Polamalu jersey. That's the first I've heard that, because you were standing next to me at the compound when I was trying to ask him about Polamalu. Remember, I must have said 6 times, Polamalu lived. I wanted to go into it.
I remember
Polamalu, him being a Polynesian, would respond from the West Coast, right? But that dude from New York kept asking him about playing with Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, trust me. You and I kept looking at each other like, can we please let that question? Because he asked like 5 times. It was ridiculous. But point being, I think there's definitely talent in the first round that's going to match tackle, and the question will be, how will that fit with Jones and Moore as the current duo, and who goes where with right tackle? We know that they want to get Broderick Jones back to left, but if Dan Moore can't play right, and what does that limit them to? I think there's more things to talk about there in the draft process. We'll do that in the next segment here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Jim Wexel. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, we'll remind you this show is also brought to you by GameTime. Buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. GameTime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all your sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. They give you killer deals on last-minute tickets and have best price guarantee that can't be beat. You can save up to 60% off up to buying last-minute tickets for sporting events, concerts, and so many more things that are going on in Pittsburgh. If you're in Pittsburgh, GameTime is giving you great prices right now for the Penguins as they try to finish out their push for the Stanley Cup final, as well as the Pittsburgh Pirates, who return after a road trip and are still, right as we speak right now, are still tied for a first place in the NL Central and playing well. You can get tickets for them or get tickets for this summer concerts where you have people like Kenny Chesney coming to town, or even other groups like the Far Side, an old school rap group, going to Mr. Small's Theater on April 21st. All those tickets can be gotten at GameTime, and the GameTime best price guarantee means you're always getting the best price. If you find tickets in the same section of row for less somewhere else, GameTime will credit you 110% of the difference. Snag the tickets without the stress with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase, or go to your website, GameTime.co. Terms and conditions apply. Create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Jim Wexell of 24/7 Sports and the Steel City Insider. Jim, let's get back into the point here. We're talking about draft stuff, and I feel you on the tackle points. I feel you on the question of where do they get wide receiver here, but it seems that right now they have several needs. The four needs that I listed out for people to do on our mock draft on Monday was tackle, corner, receiver, and tackle, corner, receiver, and center. So those are the four positions that in the first 4 rounds, or the first 3 rounds, you have 4 picks. Try to get them in there some way, somehow. If there's a position in that group that you think that they can afford to address the least of those 4, center, tackle, receiver, and corner, which is the one that you're like, if they come out of it and they say, all right, well, maybe we just gotta go get a veteran that's still in free agency who might not be great. Is there a position that you think they can afford to the most out of those 4?
Man, I hate to leave that number 3 tackle spot wide open. I don't know if Spencer Anderson's up for it yet. He's a 7th rounder from last year, a little small. And he worked at center. He might be more of an interior guy. I don't know. He didn't play much, and Dylan Cook didn't play. So I don't know that you can, but it's possible because you're going to need a nickel corner if Dante Jackson doesn't play nickel, and you can't, Dante Jackson could play nickel if you get Terry and Arnold in the draft,
right?
Or Quinyon Mitchell. And so now you've got your outside guy that you're going to probably want to play all the time. And so Dante Jackson moves inside and handles the nickel. But if you don't get one of those corners and you do take your tackle, you're going to have to get a nickel. And, the best nickels are probably 3rd round. I mean, hey, Cooper DeJean, we're missing him too.
I was going to ask you about him.
He could be my betting favorite. I forgot about him. Because I know all the Jeremiahs and all those guys, they have him ranked after 25. People say, well, it's not their value, but man, I know Mike Tomlin loves him, man. And so, and he's kind of a Minka type player, actually.
He's explosive, he's fast, and he can line up in so many places. And Mike Tomlin loves versatility in chess pieces. And that's where I was going to ask you next about him, because is he a first round guy? Like Brian Branch could have been the Steelers pick last year at the top of the 2nd round. They went with Joey Porter Jr., so they got their outside guy last year. But what would you think of getting a Cooper DeJean, a guy who could play on the outside, could play in the slot, or could be a safety? Like some guys like Jordan Reed at ESPN is like, that guy's a safety. Stop calling him a corner. He's going to be playing safety here. And they already have Baker Fitzpatrick, and they signed Deshaun Elliott, and they have KZ still on the roster. Where would DeJean rank as far as, like, if you got him at 20, what does he do immediately for this defense?
I think he's your nickel. Hey, if they say he's a safety, maybe he's a safety, but and again, just because Mike Tomlin loves him, he respects his personnel. He's in charge, but he'll respectfully listen, and he could be talked out of Cooper DeJean. Maybe they have reason to believe he's a safety, kind of like the personnel department in 1970. was just begging, Bill Nunn was begging Chuck Noll, telling him, Mel Blount can't play corner. He's a safety. The coach stuck to his guns, and the coach was right. So, that could be a modern day Tomlin Cooper DeJean thing.
That'd be funny.
With the personnel department. Like you say, some people think he's a safety, but I think he's a great chess piece, and he would be a great nickel slot to begin with, at least. And maybe he takes the outside, but he's similar to Minka because, Minka could play corner. You don't really want to because that blazing speed might beat him. He doesn't have blazing speed, but he has good enough. Carnell Lake did the job.
Yes.
Minka could do the job, and I think Cooper DeJean. Is it DeJean or DeJean?
I believe it's DeJean.
Yeah. So I think he could do the job outside. But you had mentioned somebody else that you compared Cooper to.
I'm a little drawn a blank right now.
Brian Branch. You talked about Brian Branch. Yes. Branch ran a fairly slow 40, and you can overlook that, but his tape, he got beat deep quite a bit. Mm-hmm. I mean, he made up for it with explosive hits that everybody saw in the box, but he got beat deep, and I believe in the middle of the second round is where he deserved to go, and he did. And he had a good year. He was good. He was, in a good scheme. So you hate to see a first-round nickel, but I do know Tomlin loves Cooper DeJean.
And listen, if that sets up a secondary that could be, you could be in a position where your secondary might be a force for your defense. If Joey Porter Jr. continues to grow, Dante Jackson's a solid number 2, and then DeJean is your chess piece third, defense, either your slot guy who helps at the line of scrimmage and flies all around. He has 4.43 speed. That's that's really good speed. And then you still have exactly. And then you have Minka and Deshaun Elliott. You could have 5 defensive backs on the field at all times. And with DeJean and Elliott, those are 2 guys that you can use in very versatile ways, as well as Minka Fitzpatrick. And then your secondary with that defensive front that you're still confident in guys like TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith, Cam Hayward, Ogunjobi, Keanu Benton's going to be another year older. You got Patrick Queen in the middle. That could make them in a position to be like, hey, not just a top 10 defense, maybe a top 5 defense. And then you could be excited about that. But then, of course, the question then becomes, Jim, if they go corner in the first round, where do they got to go center? They got to go O-line in the second round, and most likely that's your center. So then where do you get your third offensive tackle? Because then you aren't getting a guy who's just replacing Dan Moore Jr. on day one. Even if you think that the first round guys could, you're definitely not doing that in the third round. I think that's the dilemma here, is that the Steelers could end up with a great option at corner that is paired with Joey Porter Jr. for the long term, and the secondary could be elite. But then you are behind the 8 ball. You got to make that offensive line work with that next second round pick.
Yeah. And what about the defensive line, Chris? I mean, you started ticking off some names. Ogunjobi's not sending any fear through me.
Nope.
Maybe because he's not the nicest guy in the locker room. That always scares me. But, you got Benton. And then how long is Cam going to play? So
it's a good question.
Dean Lowry's coming off of Peck. So, yeah. There's some needs that have yet to be addressed. So let's hold the celebration on off-season acquisitions of the year. I know they got lucky and fell into some quarterbacks, but I think the franchise sold those. At least Russell Wilson, he bought the uniform jersey and the tradition and the fans as much as the head coach. I don't know that he bought. Had to be convinced.
Absolutely. Still a lot of things to cover from those angles. And like Jim said, there's still a lot of work for the Steelers front office to get done with this draft class. We'll keep you apprised of that here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, just like Jim will at 24/7 Sports, the Steel City Insider. Jim, thanks so much for joining us here. Let people can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
Just go to jimwexel.com. My books, I just finished another history of the Pittsburgh Steelers. It's a coffee table book. It'll come out in September. That'll be on my site, jimwexel.com. I have 3 books there. I've written, counting this one, I've written 6 total. A couple of them.
He cranks them out.
Yeah, I signed a deal for one next year that we'll talk about later. But thanks for having me on, Chris. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you all for joining the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. Find me here every day, Monday through Friday, breaking down your Pittsburgh Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.